This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Hello, and welcome to The Edge, Trek FM's dedicated podcast to the new and upcoming Star Trek Discovery show. I'm your host, Amy Nelson, and joined with me today is Nick Anastassiou. Nick, how are you doing?
I am doing great. I'm very happy for several reasons. A, because you and I are on the same podcast together. B, because I'm adding another Trek FM podcast to my collection of podcasts that I'm loitering around and barging in and crashing. I think I've done, The Edge now, and I've been on Stage 9 with Mike, and I've been on Standard Orbit. So, yeah, I'm very happy. And we're going to talk Discovery, so it's a great Monday night.
It is. So, listeners, we are going to be introducing to you what is going to be a little sub-show or mini podcast called Postcards from the Edge. And that's going to take a pulse after each episode and get the fans' point of view. Really excited to see what the fans have to say about each of these episodes. Of course, you will hear our regular hosts give their interpretations, but with Postcards, we're going to see your thoughts. So if you noticed on the Babel Conference, I had the Discovery and it was inside an envelope. That picture I'm going to put on the Babel Conference, and then you can tell me your thoughts, and then we will read them and discuss them here on Postcards from the Edge. I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see what you all have to say and what you think about each of the episodes, and then compare that to what the hosts are going to say. Nick, what do you think about this idea?
I think it's a great idea. I think it's a fantastic idea. And I think that what I like the most about it is that it gives fans and us another excuse, another reason to talk about Star Trek and to talk about Discovery, to do it week by week. It's the water cooler effect of, you get together after a popular episode of a popular show aired and you talk about it the next day. The cool thing is that a lot of times these types of discussions kind of expand into personal ideas, personal stories about the way we relate to Star Trek. And I think that's actually a really cool thing. I was talking with Justin Ozer a couple of weeks ago about ideas about things like that, but expanding more to Star Trek in general. And I think it's one thing that's very unique about Star Trek is how Star Trek affects fans in their personal life. And there are other shows and places where we've heard that before, but we haven't had Star Trek on the air for a long time. And this is going to be a cool opportunity to be able to have that, but week to week, and have fans talk about how it affects their life week to week, which is really cool.
Yeah, it is. So very excited. So what we're going to do is talk about your first thoughts when you heard that Star Trek was going to be coming back to TV. And so within that, we had some wide range of responses, and it was pretty fun reading all of them. We've got, finally, it's about time. They are extremely optimistic, overjoyed, butterflies in the stomach, just hungry for new Trek. It was a childhood Christmas moment, right, Nick?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Who went and wrote something that corny?
Also, I was happy to see like we have a lot of younger listeners, and so they are happy to watch the series in the first run with initial debut. So that's pretty exciting. Great
Very
to have,
exciting.
yeah, great to have Trek on TV. We've got just excited to see what a modern production of Star Trek would look like, and very hopeful. Is that what you got from reading the comments?
Yeah, I did. And, there's a range, of course. And there are some people who are more jaded, some people who are more excited, some people like me who are just basically giddy. What I was actually the happiest about is to see that there's a lot of, I don't want to say undecided people, but people who just don't know. And I kind of like that because the way that most of these fans expressed it was really nice. They basically said, I felt like I read a lot of, I'm synthesizing, but generally speaking, I'm excited about the idea. I'm happy. Obviously, I haven't seen it yet. I've only watched promotional material. So on paper, I'm with it. I reserve final judgment until I see it as it should be. And that's exactly it. This is as it should be, So I think that this is kind of the smart, educated way to react. And that's really cool. And then there was, of course, a lot of people who were just excited and who are ready for the next adventure. And it's really cool also to see, it's really nice to see, like you were saying, Amy, the younger fans who are very excited about the fact that they're going to have their first Star Trek quote unquote live experience, new Star Trek. And you hear that story a lot, that for a lot of people, actually, regardless of the generation who have become fans, it came through a family affair kind of thing. Usually it's with a sibling, an older sibling or a parent. And so a lot of times you come into it because your older brother, your older sister, your mom, your dad watched Star Trek and you watched it with them. And so you started to love it, but you kind of have that, that was their thing, right? And so I think that makes it really extra exciting when all of a sudden, and you're still young enough that you're kind of like, okay, I can appreciate this as a kid almost, and that's going to be my Star Trek. That's really cool, and I think for older fans who have lived that becomes kind of a cycle, which is, wow, this happened to me. I had this new Star Trek Next Gen or TOS or whichever when I was that age. And now at this different part in my life, it's happening again, which is also really exciting.
I know. And that's sort of my story because I came in, Next Gen was already on air. And so Next Gen, as you know, since I host Earl Grey, that's going to be my Star Trek. But I'm so excited for Discovery because I never really got into the other series premieres, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, a little more so with Enterprise. But this one, like, I'm really into Star Trek and so much social media and there's information coming out. And so I'm very excited to take this on as my own Star Trek for the first time, to just see it from its inception and to the end, hopefully. So
yeah. And I think, I think part of that was also because there has been such a gap between the last time Star Trek was on TV and now. I think that probably is contributing, even for fans who have gone through it before and who have had the excitement. It's contributing to make it more of a big deal than DS9 was, or Voyager, or even Enterprise. And it's not to take away anything from these shows, but it's just the fact that Star Trek was on the air, and it was, even by DS9, I think DS9, I remember it took me a little bit by surprise. I didn't expect that I was going to get 2 Star Trek shows, but still, very quickly, we were kind of, Next Gen was already huge. So it was kind of a surprise, but kind of not, because you were kind of starting to slip into the routine of assuming that Star Trek is going to be here always in one form or another. It was becoming second nature almost. And now we've gone back to a little bit of what it was between TOS and Next Gen, where you don't take Star Trek for granted so much. So when it comes back, it's a bigger deal.
Exactly. It was interesting reading the comments on the Babel conference, because there were a lot of comments talking about this roller coaster ride. Yay, I'm so excited Trek's on. Oh, it's a prequel. Oh, I saw the first trailer and I loved it. Oh, Brian Fuller's no longer working on it. Oh, we're getting all this diversity. Oh, look at the Klingons, right? And you could just see it. Seriously, some fans have gone through some serious roller coaster rides with Discovery.
That's very true. And I think, it's a very, very good point, because you're right. Across the different kind of comments, you did see this kind of wave, and it's not necessarily positive than negative. It's more kind of sometimes it's back and forth. Some of the fans who responded were kind of indicating, I was very excited, and then I was very scared, and now I'm excited again. Some were saying actually that they were less so excited at first, and then as they've seen more things, they've kind of gained momentum. But there's definitely seems to be kind of a back and forth. I think I jotted down maybe 6 or 7 points that seem to come back more often than not, issues, which are some of the ones you mentioned, which kind of created this sort of like back and forth, this almost like a metronome, a TikTok kind of like, whoa, we swing one way and whoa, we swing the other way. And, I think ultimately it's all about context. And I mean, that's one of the things that come with a little bit of age and experience. We went through it. I've heard other fans say that, we went through it when TNG was premiering. At the time, I was less aware of it because I was further away and I was younger. But even then, I remember actually myself going through something very similar. I remember when I first found out that TNG was going to be a thing, getting super excited. I had never imagined in my whole life that there would be new Star Trek on TV. So that was kind of like the up. And then I started to read that it was going to take place in the 24th century, that Kirk wasn't going to be there, and it was going to be a completely different crew. And then I saw some pictures, and I was like, who are these people? That's not Star Trek. And I had the same reaction, right? And I got scared. And then I started to see promos or whatever, and then I kind of went full circle where I was getting excited again because the music, because of an article with Gene Roddenberry. So I think it's all par for the course. One thing that I was really happy to see in most of the fans is all of them, regardless of where they are on that spectrum and where they've been, most of them kind of keep an open mind enough to say, but at the end of the day, I just want to sit down and watch the show, and that'll be the final judgment.
Yeah, I definitely did see that theme, that it's like, yeah, there's worries and maybe there's some critiques and what's going on and the lack of information or too much information. I mean, I've heard both sides, but most fans are saying, I'm going to reserve judgment and just give it a chance, and then we'll see, after. So I appreciate the fans for making that comment, because you do want to see what's going to happen and not just, slam the door before it even gets going. Well, I was going to get into some of those worries and critiques that came up, because I think there are some valid worries and, some people have some concerns about it. There were quite a few just recently because of this mature audience rating. And, the concern is that Star Trek, like, as you mentioned, you start watching Star Trek with your family. And so there's many parents who want to introduce their children to this new Star Trek. And what does this mature rating, what is that going to do? What is that going to look like? And how is that going to play in with me wanting to have my family watch it with me?
Mm-hmm. See, it's a great thing you and I are podcasting together right now, because that was one of the 7 items on my list. I was struck by how often it came back. And I'll be completely honest. It probably is my European upbringing, not that we're like bloodthirsty barbarians and we don't care about violence or graphic violence in Europe, but I didn't think about it until I started to see that it was coming back, and it was a genuine concern from people who, like you said, these are not kind of anger-ridden mob-like fans who are just shouting. These are people making a really good, sound argument. It got me thinking about it, and so it's not a ready-made opinion. I had to stop and think, and again, I kind of contextualize things. I apologize to our listeners, your listeners, ahead of time if I come across too often in this podcast as an apologist. It's not my intention, but I do think if you think about the MA rating, you have to, first bit of context, it's the first Star Trek show that is going to be on the air with this rating in existence. So the first bit of context there, you can't compare it to Next Gen, DS9, TOS, because that just didn't exist. Just to make a little parallel to the movies, I saw a lot of movies in the 70s, back when parents let kids ride in the back of the car without seat belts, and your mom smoked 2 feet away from you, and that I probably shouldn't have seen. And that's actually, it sounds like I'm making a case against what I'm going to say, but the point is that there were a lot of movies out there which were rated PG, and then even PG-13 when that came about, not until the 80s. There was not even a PG-13 until the 80s. So a lot of these things are developed as times go by, and society is different. What is appropriate, what is considered mature or not, okay for family. Let's go back to the 60s when TOS was on. If this MA rating had existed, well, to be honest, the episode where Kirk kisses Uhura would have probably gotten an MA rating, because the network was already scared enough as it was when that episode was going to air. And if they had had any chance to try to censor it, basically, or warn people off, they would have probably done it. And if you look at even in Next Gen, on another respects, the season 1 episode, Conspiracy, that would have definitely gotten an MA rating, right? So whether it's just gore, horror, or really current, difficult topics, the episode of Next Generation that got banned in Ireland, that talked about basically the IRA and terrorism. Many episodes of Deep Space Nine would have probably gotten an MA rating. And this is another bit of context. I would say we can safely assume that what they mean by that is we don't need to be worried that it's going to be Game of Thrones in space and it's going to be, limbs flying off and people taking off their clothes. And I think these people are smart enough to know what Star Trek is, first of all, and who watches Star Trek. I think what that means is, and again, this is why it's good that we have these ratings now, is if it's at the head, it's telling parents what I think they should know ahead of time, which is, what I would tell people is, watch the episode first and then decide, is what is talked about, what's shown, something that I can watch again tomorrow with my kid, with my younger brother. And it's all that rating says. And again, it's not necessarily that you're going to see people naked or gore. It's that there might be issues discussed. And it might be something as simple, talking about Kirk and Uhura. It might be something as simple as seeing Anthony Rapp and the character who plays his boyfriend share a kiss. To some people, that's no big deal. Just like today, seeing a white man kiss an African-American woman is no big deal. To some people, it might be a bigger deal. So this is actually a way of saying we're just gonna let you know, watch it, and then decide for yourself.
Right. If you listen to the most recent episode of Hyper Channel 173, it talks about that MA rating and how the writers and the producers, they all know what Star Trek is. They all know it's a family show. And so I tend to agree with you on that it may be that the storyline is, very controversial, where it may not be, the sex and the gore and the blood and, hopefully not conspiracy again, but, that the story ideas that they're talking about do require a more mature mind. And so I think you should watch it first if you are concerned, depending on the age of your children, and preview it, as I think any adult should with children, especially given that rating. So I think it is fair for them to give us a heads up and to let you be the deciding factor what comes in your household.
Absolutely. And I mean, and we all have stories, like I was saying. The good thing about these ratings is that they allow us to anticipate, and if we are responsible parents, to take action beforehand, which we didn't have before. And you don't have to go all the way back to the 60s. Zach Moore, he's younger, and he was born in the late 80s, had stories of watching Next Generation when he was a kid and being so scared by some episodes that he jumped and ran behind the couch. Well, I mean, it's fun when you're 30 and you're sharing that story with your buddies. It's fun, but a more sensitive parent today might say, well, that's a case where maybe if I had seen this episode before, then I wouldn't have shown it to Zach and I would have skipped to the next week's episode.
Right. Another concern, which I have had, I'm sort of at peace with it now. But some people have commented that they are worried that we're getting another prequel. Why can't we move forward? Why can't it be post Nemesis and have this future? They always want Star Trek to be in the future. And granted, yes, 10 years before Kirk is our future, but they want it, post Nemesis. And to be honest, I have thought that. And I'm like, why can't we just keep moving forward? We went from Spock and Kirk and then to the 24th and Picard. And then that went more in the future and then more in the future. We've already had our prequel with Enterprise. So why are we getting another prequel? So I can definitely understand where the fans are coming from. However, I'm at peace with it and I just want Trek on TV. So
same here. I mean, I think, yeah, you couldn't have said it better. And this is one where I completely share the same general idea. If I could wave a magic wand today and become the Akiva Goldsman of Discovery and be the showrunner, my first impulse would not have been to try to mine an area that's already been shown and mine, any of them actually, not TOS, not TNG. I would have tried to. This is a case where it doesn't necessarily apply in every case, but this is a case where I would have said, okay, we got to follow Gene's example. And one area where I would say he was definitely 100% right is understanding for creative, practical, all kinds of reasons. It's a different era. It's a different time. Star Trek needs to reflect its own time. The only way to do that is create a new Star Trek from the ground up. It's going to operate on some of the same principles, but it's going to reflect a different society. And I would have moved it forward. And I think that there's a lot, including some of the events that meld into the Kilden timeline and the destruction of Romulus and all that, which really is kind of the perfect setup if you want to create a Star Trek world where you can tell stories that are true to canon, true to the ideas, but also which allows you to reflect some of what we're going through as a society today. Like you said, first of all, I've made my peace with it because I just want new Star Trek, and because they've sold me on, so far, everything I've seen is exciting and is cool. And then the last thing is, and that's just a hope. I'm just speculating. I don't know, but I want to think, again, the people who are in charge know Star Trek. That much we know. They understand it. And again, it's not a big Star Trek secret to get that Star Trek needs to move forward. So I can't imagine that they're not aware of that themselves. And even if they weren't, I can't imagine that they haven't heard that, because it's coming back. It's coming again and again and again. So I want to hope that they're aware of that, and that with that in mind, I don't know if they have a plan, but they have an idea at least of how we could start from this and progressively still move forward. Mike Schindler and I were talking at some point over Messenger about, Fuller, I think, has disclosed that initially he wanted to do more of an anthology show where we were gonna jump through different timelines. Maybe they've retained some of his ideas. Maybe the idea is okay, well, what is the most popular, most famous anchor, era of Star Trek? It's TOS. So we're gonna bring people back there. And then progressively, I don't know if it's going to be from series to series or with miniseries, but we're going to progressively move through the timeline, the TOS movies, the 24th century, and then beyond. Oh, look what I did here.
So I have a question for you, reading these posts, and Damien brought up a really good point, and it was one of his critiques that here we are now 2017, and why are we always relying on the Spock and the Kirk. So Discovery could have been great, but then we have Michael Burnham's being the adopted sister, whatever, of Spock. Like can it just be independent? Are we always having to have this crutch of Kirk and Spock in this incarnation of Star Trek? I know Next Gen, they really tried to avoid that until the inevitable, when it was like, all right, we throw our hands up, and then they started having everyone on. But at the beginning, like Gene Roddenberry really wanted to have that distinction that it wasn't the original series. And so I appreciated Damien bringing that up, because I was like, yeah, why are we always going back to Spock?
Well, yeah, it's a really good point. The Gene Roddenberry in me, and I'm not being pretentious by saying that. I'm just saying basically the creative who works in the vacuum of himself is 100% like that. And I never met Gene Roddenberry, never worked with him, but I worked with George Lucas for a long time, and he's another very single-minded, visionary, creative, in many ways like that. When you are one of those men, I mean, they both have a history of having a friction that was rather constant with the establishment of the entertainment industry, having very single-minded agenda. Some of the directors I worked with said before, being a director is not working in a democracy, it's being a dictator. And you have to impose your vision. What I'm trying to get at by saying that is these guys, and sometimes they make mistakes for better or worse, and this is one of the better situations, at times they have an idea which goes against the common sense grain of Hollywood. And they will say, I know in my heart of hearts that it's the right thing to do. And I understand creatively why, and I understand why you're saying practically, it's not safe, but I don't care, because I know it's the right thing to do creatively, and I have the power at this particular point to say, we're going to do it anyway, which is the big thing, is you have to be at that point where you can say, I know you don't like it, but we're going to do it anyway. That's the dictator part. Even though Roddenberry made concessions, even in season 1, we had a direct throwback to TOS, a couple, but still, yeah, he was very hardcore about trying to avoid that. And he was right. The common sense thread of Hollywood is that it's one of those things. It's, whether you're a producer or writer, a director, a lot of times you're going to fall back on it's the path of least resistance. What is the easiest way to grab my viewer? What is the easiest way to get at the goal? And, as a producer or writer, you're going to look and say, okay, well, everybody knows Spock. Everybody loves Spock. If I want to write a good Star Trek story, I should put Spock in it. I mean, it's literally that simple. A producer's going to tell you, listen, dude, I'm just, 1 + 1 = 2. And so, it takes a very strong vision and a very strong power to impose it, to say, I get it, but we're not going to do it. In this case, I think that we're definitely in a different ball game. It's a different era. And right now, financial interests always have to align with creative interests. I don't want to say now more than before, but in the situation that Star Trek and the entertainment industry is in, it has to be more of a reality even than before. These moguls are disappearing, if not, or have disappeared. Everything is more collectively produced. And so I think that, again, we have to kind of be realistic, and it would be great to have a Roddenberry powerhouse or George Lucas powerhouse behind Star Trek. But right now it is a committee of talented people, producers, writers, a network. They're committed, which is all good. It's more than you're going to get on a lot of productions. And so we should count ourselves lucky for that. But it's still going to be these people who have to constantly marry the practical, the business side with the creative. And so I think that having something like the relationship between Burnham and Sarek and Spock is going to be one of those concessions. I did notice, like the comment that came up a couple of times about her being his sister or half sister. And that's something that I want to put, I think, a little bit of an asterisk on, because I think that's some of the clickbait articles misled fans, because she's not his sister. She's not even his half sister. You can barely call her a stepsister, because she's not even really that. All that is, it's more of a war situation. She's basically a rescue, and she was raised on Vulcan. She so happens to have been raised by Spock's dad and Spock's mom. So it's adoptive sister, I guess you could say, but
right.
Foster sister.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah. All right. And then, of course, one of the major worries that we've seen for a long time is about these Klingons. And I'll tell you, after seeing, and I saw this in the thread, that after seeing these Klingons and hearing them at San Diego Comic-Con or Star Trek Las Vegas, I think people are more on board with what they are going to do with the Klingons. There were quite a few comments that were like, I'm really excited to see this deep exploration of the Klingon culture, and that so happy that it's not going to be this monoculture, that we're really going to get and see what makes up a Klingon and have that context within and parallel, I guess, with the Federation, because we know the Federation and every other culture. And I had the same comment as well. It's like, oh, is every single Klingon all about glory and honor? Well, no, just like every single person on Earth, you can't lump every single person that's an Earthling. It just doesn't even make sense. So I'm glad to see so many comments that are, excited to see this new exploration into the Klingon culture.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with you. I think I'm going to probably be catching a lot of flack on the Babel conference, but the Klingons, I like the Klingons. They're cool. To me, they've always been kind of tropey in the sense that they're like, that's how they were conceived in TOS. They were kind of the obvious bad guy, right? The mustache twirling villain. And they changed completely in terms of personality and so on in TNG, but still they were kind of, and even though they weren't necessarily the bad guys, but they were still kind of like, as a plot device, they were kind of very, very simple to figure out what they were supposed to represent, good or bad. And so in that sense, for me, they were cool, but they were never that interesting. And everything I'm going to say here is going to be super unpopular with a lot of fans, but that's okay. Because to me, they didn't start getting more interesting until Enterprise, actually. In Enterprise, I felt like we were starting to actually explore. I think Enterprise was starting to be a little more bold about exploring the era, obviously, that preceded Kirk and Spock, and what went wrong. And we're not going to say they were bad guys and humans were good guys. We're going to set up kind of more of a series of misunderstandings, and through that, we're going to start to show more of a multifaceted approach of how, from different perspectives, you could see it a different way. And I thought that was very interesting. And I think a really good example of that was the episode where Archer is on trial. And to me, that's actually the most in canon interesting scene about Klingon culture that I've seen in all of Star Trek, is that scene where he's talking with his lawyer. And basically, long story short, his lawyer realizes that Archer has perceived that all Klingons are warriors. And he says, well, that's not possible. How do you think we could have existed as a society? And he says, we used to be much more of a caste-driven system with equal footings, and you had artists and you had engineers and you had warriors, but then the military became more and more influential, and now we're different as a society. And that I thought was fascinating. So if we're going to get more of that, I'm completely on board. And as far as the look goes, as long as they look cool, as long as they look, savage when they need to look savage, and a true warrior culture, which a lot of them on Earth actually are very intricate in their art. And if you look at Maori warriors, for example, they have they work war into their art, into their music. So if they're going to show a lot more of that kind of a detail of that warlike culture, that's great. I mean, and this is not the first one to say it, the Klingons doesn't get much more canon than that, having different Klingons in a new Star Trek series.
Exactly. All right. Some other thoughts on Discovery. Some people and literary treks will be happy to hear this, that they're very glad to have authors like David Mack and Dayton Ward writing books concurrently with the Star Trek Discovery. And I am also happy about that. And I am looking forward to reading those books and expanding what I know about Discovery. Are you going to read any?
Yeah, I probably will, because when TNG was at its height, like in the early 90s, 91, 92, I started to read. I read the TNG novels from the beginning at that point, and I read I just found them at my parents' when I was there a couple months ago. I must have read the first 30, 40 or so novels. And then then I moved out here and work and life and blah, blah, blah. And I lost track. And by the time, my fandom kind of reignited, there had just been so many books that I felt like it was too daunting. And then a couple of years ago, I found Trek FM and Literary Treks, and I'll completely fess up. It's kind of the lazy, the cheat for me, because I was like, it's great. I have, at the time it was Matt and Dan, and now it's Dan and Bruce Gibson. And I was like, I don't need to read these books. These guys tell me everything that's going on. I have them. They're perfect. They're my weekly free Audible account. But this is kind of a chance to start from scratch, right? With a fresh sort of year zero.
Yeah.
So
Start
I'm probably
with number one.
Yeah, I'm probably going to. And now that I've heard also all these authors on Literary Treks before, it's great, because you feel like you've heard the guys, and now you get to read their work and experience it. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And the fact that Kirsten Byers is one of the writers for the show itself, and she is so well respected in the fan community, is great. And that also shows to me, again, that the craft and the care that went into assembling the right people to make this show. The fact that they thought, okay, we need different types of writers, but also anchor points, people who are trusted and who know Star Trek each in their own way.
Another current thought. Some listeners were wondering about Michael Burnham's backstory and how all the crews are going to relate one to another. And so they're sort of excited to get the character stories that come along, because we know Star Trek is all about building the characters and good stories. So with what they've set up with the multiple crews and the two different ships, and then how they are going to interplay, they're really looking forward to seeing that in Discovery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that touches for me upon a thing that I saw in another one of the people who gave feedback, who basically, I think, hang on, I'm going to try to look for that person's name, but is someone who was, it's David Bellion, I think. I hope I pronounced the name right. It's Belyen. And he could not have put it better when he talked about ethos, and ethos being what defines, in his opinion, whether a story is going to be true, quote unquote, Star Trek or not. And I'm not going to try to convince anyone who doesn't think the same way, and he wasn't either. But I do agree completely, and I think that this touches upon what you were talking about, which is character. Bill Shatner, Roddenberry, and then from then down on have always said, really, Star Trek is a morality play. It's about the human condition. It's about what it means to be a person alive in this world. As fantastical as it sounds, because it's about exploring far and further away from Earth, but really it's about the human condition. And so, of course, all of that is channeled through character. And you need the right types of characters as a setup, as a chessboard, to be able to explore that. And that's what I think David was talking about in terms of the ethos. And he said it perfectly. He said, for me, I look at the character setup that they have, like you were saying, Amy, and I see all the right elements for Star Trek ethos, for true Star Trek ethos, for exploring the human question, exploring, what it is to be human. And that's what I'm going to judge it on, not the color of the uniform or whether this ship belongs more in 2290 that it should in 2250. And, these are things, and this is not to demean or belittle anyone, who cares for those things. I love these things. I love the continuity and all that, but it's basically, that's candy wrapper. It's great. It's cool. But what's at the heart, what makes Star Trek work it's the ethos. And Burnham definitely, I think I see it in all the others around her, but for sure, they seem to have taken a lot of time to figure out a character who can represent a lot of things that we can find in Spock, in Data, and a lot of that questioning what is it to be where I am, to be who I am, and how I am. That's really what Star Trek is about. The rest, and I would tell fans, and again, it's not to belittle it. It's on the contrary, the rest, let's trust ourselves, because honestly, the Star Trek producers have never given much of a damn about continuity, about the color of the uniforms or the patches. They kind of, to the extent that they do care, they rely on us to make it fit after the fact, and we do. We're cool like that. We basically step in and say, wait a minute, I'm going to find a way to actually explain why it would look like this or not sound like that. And we do. And then eventually sometimes the producers work that back in and they kind of wink at us saying, okay, we'll give you that. So, we'll figure it out. We're Star Trek fans.
Yeah. Everyone has their own headcanon.
Yeah. That's what we do.
Yeah, definitely. And just conveying the spirit of what makes Star Trek. Yeah, those stories and the characters. That has, when I asked what are your hopes for Discovery, that was the main thing. Telling good stories, developing the characters, that you just saw that over and over again. They were talking also that some of their hopes is that it's going to last long enough that it actually gets its footing, and maybe even longer than 3 or 4 years. We would love to have it be 7 years like Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, of course. But that it does, that it gets its footing, because not every series has had its best at season 1. Dare I say any of them?
Yeah, I think that's another. If we launch into that, then I'm going to go from unpopular to downright hated.
Okay.
But I'm happy to go into it. But
we want it to get its footing so that it can develop and we can tell all of the stories that we want to see. Definitely.
And I think the other thing, well, I would say, also I would tell fans, it's too early to tell anyway, and we won't know that until 2 or 3 years from now or 4 years from now. But if it were to be only 3 seasons or 4 seasons, I would tell fans again, contextualize. In the landscape of 2017, that is not at all the same statement as it would be when Enterprise aired or when TOS aired. The way that TV is written today, and you can barely even call it TV still, the way that it's written, the way it's produced, is much more sophisticated, much more concentrated on big productions within an arc, within a season. They tend to serialize, and so they all already will kind of plot out, to a certain extent, a beginning, middle, and end, oftentimes. That drives them to realize the fact that oftentimes when you do a whole arc, a good one is not sustainable over more than 4, maybe 5 seasons. Most shows, if you take big shows like Lost or The X-Files, those were test tubes to really show, and those were amazing shows, very popular, milestone shows. But on the downside, they also showed that past a certain point, it kind of reaches its expiration date, and then it just sort of self-perpetuates. And I think you see now a more concerted effort among producers and writers to avoid that and to kind of say, okay, let's just write out the story we want to tell and not try to drag it on. The fact that we're going away from network TV means that we don't have to, because a lot of times writing a 5, 6, 7, whatever season arc wasn't so much driven by, oh, it's cool, let's just make more of it. It was more like, well, let's just syndicate more of this show. The more we write, the more we'll be able to make money back once it's no longer on the air, just by sending it, by selling it for reruns. Now that it's no longer advertisement driven, they don't need to do that. And I think that it does help a lot of time make sure that maybe you're not going to get 7 seasons, but the seasons you do get are going to be stronger. And Game of Thrones might come up as an example, but that's a different case because they started out with the plan, like Harry Potter, to do kind of a season a book, and there were already 5 books, so they knew they wanted to do 5 seasons. And the idea was that George R.R. Martin was going to write book 6 and book 7. So they already knew that if the show worked, they were gonna be in for the long run. And again, you don't even know. It could be that we have the equivalent of what would be 7 seasons, but it might not be 7 seasons worth of Discovery. It might jump in the timeline. It might be the first 2 years Discovery, and then the 3rd year might be, I don't know, something in the 25th century or something else.
Right. Going back to that anthology idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And some people are very hoping and looking forward to the awesome starships and cool characters, good stories. And Davis wants some cool action figures, some more collectibles and toys for everyone, right?
Yeah, I just want that communicator. I love that thing. Oh man, if they sell that thing as a Bluetooth, where you can actually make it work with your phone and that little LCD screen, and I don't even want to talk about that.
Well, they have the communicator as a Bluetooth right now, but just not the Discovery one.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I've come close already to springing the money for the TOS one.
Yeah,
but it's $200, so I'm telling myself, no, don't do it.
you'll wait for the Discovery one.
Exactly.
Okay. And I would just like to end with the one hope that I think all Trek fans have, and give Sarah credit. She hopes that Discovery will get more people into Star Trek. And I think we all can agree that that would be a very good thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I think you hear that a lot about the Kelvin timeline as well. Some people love it. Some people hate it. I love some of it and I didn't like some of it. I think it's pretty easy to figure out which part of it I didn't like. But I think, most Star Trek fans, if not all of them, will agree that one cool thing it did do, and it genuinely did do that. In 2009, especially when the first movie came out, it did bring in a lot of new young fans. And how cool is that? I mean, if you were anywhere from 8 to 15 when you first discovered Star Trek, whether that was in 1966 or in 1986 or later, how cool is it to be able to say, hey, look, this kid who's now 12 or 13 is going through the same thing I am and loving it. And even if you don't like the same Star Trek, that's okay. It doesn't matter. So yeah, I think it's all good. I mean, I have a friend who I love dearly, and he told me that he got into Star Trek from watching 2009. He had never watched Star Trek before, saw 2009, loved it, and decided to check Star Trek out, and became a fan of all of it. So. Yeah,
well, even our own Justin Oser from Earl Grey, listening to his story, like he saw a few, never really got into it, and it was Star Trek 09 that got him in, and he fell in love with it and was so happy to see Star Trek that he went back and watched everything. But it brings new blood into Star Trek, and to build this franchise is definitely, like you said, with the Kelvin timeline. You hate it, you love it, but you give it props because it did bring in new blood. And that's what we want, so that Star Trek will endure, because we can't have all of us getting old and dying off and not having it perpetuate. So
absolutely. And again, it's not like don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I would tell people, don't be afraid. And if you don't like it, that's okay too. And you don't, I think a lot of times in life, people feel like to have someone be different means that they have to be like this person or else the world's going to break. It's no big deal. If someone watches Discovery and loves it, and you genuinely went to it with an open heart and it wasn't your cup of tea, that's totally fine. The fact that they love it doesn't challenge your perception of it. Just like the fact that they may not like TOS shouldn't make what they like any less, or doesn't make TOS any less either. And I think we can all, I've never been a big Voyager fan, but I love meeting Voyager fans. And I love the fact that we love Star Trek, and we can poke fun at each other for like stuff that I think is silly about Voyager, and they'll, poke fun at TNG or TOS. But at the end of the day, we both respect our fandoms and share a greater thing. That's a really good life lesson, I think.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, it has been so wonderful having you on the edge and helping me introduce Postcards, our new mini show.
Likewise, the pleasure was all mine.
So it's been fun talking about Postcards from the Edge today, but it isn't the only thing we've been discussing here on the network. So here's a quick look at some of the other things you might have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm, Earl Grey.
The original Enterprise bridge set up with all the panels lit up. They have the sounds of the bridge. I mean, you walk in and there's a sort of reverence that's there, and you can hear the swishing of the doors and the little beeping, and it just seems hallowed ground. And I go walking in every year and just feel the presence of Star Trek.
Meta Treks.
I don't like to have too much time, Zachary, to sit and contemplate, because I do sometimes end up second-guessing my decisions. But that...
Second-guess your whole life if you let yourself. That's not good.
Absolutely. And honestly, that is a recurring theme, I think, in this season.
Literary Treks.
Oh, Matthew, I'm doing just fine. It's always fun every week to hop on here and talk Star Trek books and comics with you. And I don't know if you realize this, Matthew, but this is our 200th episode of Literary... Wait a minute, Matthew. We don't host this show anymore.
And introducing The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
But if I ended up missing an episode, I would record 45 minutes of blank space on my VHS tape, and then I would wait until it came around, and then I would put the episode in its proper order.
This explains so much.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all of these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and written review. That will help other listeners find our show. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. That's what the show is about. And there are many ways for you to do that. The best place is to join in the larger conversation is in the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, you can do that too. Go to trek.fm/contact. choose to send to a show and select The Edge. That will come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at Trek FM and on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. Now, if you would like to contact me personally, I am on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson, but I hang out at the Babel Conference. Nick, what if people want to talk to you some more about Star Trek?
I'm not on Twitter, but I am on Facebook. It's just me, Nicolas Anastassiou. And you can also find me loitering at the Babel Conference quite a bit.
Yes, so. You are there. All right. If you'd like to help us keep all of our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, you could be cool like Nick, and more. Available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month. We really appreciate any support you can give us and hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find the details at patreon.com/TrekFM. So join us next week for another episode of The Edge. Hailing frequencies open.